The very promise of reconciliation that your government put forward is, destroyed is the word that the president of the BC Métis Federation told me today in an interview because of this.
Earlier today, we learned that Randy Boissonnault resigned, stepped away, left, or, was fired from cabinet. The news broke right before question period, but the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP parties sent a delegate to talk about the fallout with Vassiliopoulos on CTV this evening, and it did not go well for the Liberals.
Let's take a look.
Mark Gerritsen is Deputy Government House Leader. Andrew Scheer is the Conservatives House Leader. And Peter Julian is the NDP's House Leader. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your patience. And I appreciate you making the time for the conversation tonight. Before we get to this conversation, I do have to ask you about the significant news today. Minister Boissonnault stepping aside from cabinet. Mr. Gerritsen, from your government's perspective, why was the Prime Minister standing by his side yesterday morning and 24 hours later, he's not in cabinet?
Well, I think it's important to reflect on what has happened. Mr. Boissonnault has spent a number of days now.
Minister who?
Is this the other Randy? Is there a Randy Boissonnault and a Randy Boissonnault? Maybe we finally learned who the other Randy is.
I don't know why they send Mark Gerritsen to these things because he's not a very good orator and he can't even pronounce his own cabinet minister's name.
You had one guy to remember. One. And it's not like it's a new MP, and it's not like you haven't seen his name before. He's literally been in the news pretty much every single day, and he's been in question period every single day.
But the Liberals have only been paying attention to their hit pieces on the Conservatives. They haven't been paying attention to, the problems in their own caucus.
Right. And, yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Gerritsen.
Defending himself. I think that he recognizes it's becoming a distraction, and based on the information that you've already reported on, had a conversation with the Prime Minister, and they came to the conclusion that the best way for him to move forward was to step away from cabinet to remove himself as a distraction while he focuses on defending himself, which is
okay. So for anyone who was still unclear what happened, yesterday Randy Boissonnault was determined to continue his position as a cabinet minister. Trudeau came back, they had a conversation, and they felt it best for him to step away.
I'm sure they did.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's called being fired. They say it's a resignation because that puts the least amount of drama around a move like this for a political party. You see it in organizations all the time as well. So basically, hey, go quietly, we'll let you go with dignity, and this is what we'll say happens. So, but you better believe that Trudeau said, Randy, it's time to go.
It's exactly what he said in his statement.
So there's no admission of wrongdoing here. This is just because in no part of the statement today did they say this is a distraction? We're stepping aside because of a distraction. Just that he's going to focus on clearing his name. So there's no admittance here of wrongdoing from your perspective.
No, Mr. Boissonnault has been very clear about this.
Minister Bazoo, is that what I heard?
No, he said Boissonnault again.
Oh, Boissonnault. Still though, it's not Boissonnault.
Dude, he's in your own caucus. Now, wait a minute. I should say, to be fair, about half of the Conservative caucus calls Garnet Genuous.
We did too, until we were told.
Yeah. So you know what? Maybe I'll give Gerritsen a bit of a pass on that.
In the statements that he's made in defending himself over the last week, and he's now, said that he is going to take the time to reflect on that and make ssure that he clears his name.
Respectfully, based on what you've heard, do you actually feel he has been clear? I think the problem, and certainly I interviewed the president, for example, of the BC Métis Federation today. The problem is they feel like it's been much less than clear, and that in fact there have been, something that he apologized for last week, shifting ways in which he identifies as Indigenous at different parts of his history over the last decade, like that is not sitting well with, for example, people like that. Does it sit? Is that okay with you?
I think
For the record, that was CTV's audio again.
Yeah, for once it wasn't us.
So, but back to the question. So Gerritsen's trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, everything's fine. Well, if everything's fine, why was he stepping away? And Vashi's like, well, I was talking to some like Indigenous leaders before. They're not okay with this. They're really not okay with this. They're the opposite of okay with this. Gerritsen?
The sheer fact that we're even having this conversation demonstrates that this is a distraction, and it's creating, taking away from the important discussions that we need to be having about supporting Canadians right now. And
But
Mr.
your government
Blasio
has
has
said
recognized that. He's
reconciliation is
recognized that,
important.
and he's made a point of saying, I'm going to step away after having a conversation with the Prime Minister, and I'm going to focus on defending myself. So I think it's important that we let Mr. Blasio speak for himself and
He won't.
demonstrate that for himself.
To be fair,
over
I've
time.
requested him multiple times. He won't do that. I don't understand what the mechanism is that is going to clear his name all of a sudden. And again, I ask with great respect. I don't think it's a distraction that Indigenous people are, telling us that they feel like the very promise of reconciliation that your government put forward is, destroyed is the word that the president of the BC Métis Federation told me today in an interview because of this. Like, that's not just a distraction.
No.
So, if you couldn't see it, Gerritsen's foot up to his kneecap, up to his thigh, was all the way down his mouth. You may have missed it, but it was there.
Figuratively, of course.
It was absolutely there. He actually looked like he was being scolded like a 12-year-old child when Vashi was actually telling him that. Because he was like, oh, yeah, that's probably not the wording that I should be using here. Oh, well, this is just a distraction. The BC Métis people don't think it's a distraction. They literally said that the party championing
Indigenous rights
and truth and reconciliation has destroyed it. That's what they said. Destroyed.
That's really strong language.
Yeah. So, Mark, this is not a distraction for them. And again, this is what the Liberals do, everybody. They just want to say, you know what? Let's just move past this. Forget about it. It doesn't matter anymore. Focus on everything else. Forget about all the scandals. This is the problem. This isn't a distraction. This is an indictment. And that's very, very different. It's a cabinet minister that is embroiled in wrongdoing and has been lying and stealing reputation from Indigenous people for who knows how long. Like, he even calls himself, Mr. Eagle Power or whatever he calls himself. Like, it's
almost as bad as stolen valor.
It's just as bad, yeah. It's just in a different way. And Indigenous people criticize this because they're like, it's no picnic being Indigenous. So the fact that people are just labeling themselves this in order to get a financial advantage is actually disgraceful. So anyhow, you have that. But an actual distraction would be something that is non-political, nothing to do with the minister, and it's coming from his personal life, and it's non-criminal, but it keeps eating away at the news cycle. That's an actual distraction. So, maybe it's a divorce or an ex-wife or an ex-husband or something like that, but that's constantly coming into the news cycle. That's what you would call a distraction. That would be a reason to step away from cabinet in order to avoid your own personal issues from impacting the government. This is different. This is somebody who has worked with his business partner to label the company as Indigenous and LGBTQ, and he's trying to say, well, I didn't know that. Well, guy,
it's your company. You're responsible.
Well, it also happened before he was elected.
Right.
These bids were happening back in 2020. He was elected in 2021. So no, I don't think so. Boissonnault.
Yeah, he is fully accountable as the owner of that company.
What I'm saying is that when I say it's a distraction, it's taking away from us being able to focus on what's really important for Canadians right now, because it's consuming a lot of the time in the House. So
Reconciliation is important too.
Absolutely. And
Nothing
right.
else is getting done in the house.
Well, but then you just saw the other foot and leg go into his mouth now, because he's saying, well, more important things. Pretty sure this is important to the Indigenous chiefs across the country.
This is important to everybody because ministers get paid like $300,000 a year. And when you have one that's trying to skirt the ethics laws, that's a huge problem. And all of us should be invested in this.
Well, and somebody who has, again, been deliberately deceiving Canadians about his heritage. And he's saying, well, I'm finding myself. Maybe you should find yourself and be sure about yourself before you go around, parroting all this stuff, talking Cree to people like you're an elder, presenting yourself as Indigenous, and then joining the Indigenous caucus.
Well, and again, it's because liberals love labels, right? If they weren't so crazy about identity politics, none of this would have happened. None of this would have mattered.
Making sure that we focus and work on that is extremely important. But Mr. Blasio has come to the conclusion, after having a conversation with the Prime Minister, I need to step away from cabinet in order to focus on clearing my name and defending myself. So I think it's important that we let him do that work, we let him demonstrate that, and then we can draw conclusions at that time.
Okay, I want to get in your colleagues, and then we will. I've left a lot of time for the other discussion that I know we want to have tonight. Mr. Scheer, is there a world? Your party was the first to call for Mr. Boissonnault to step aside. Is there a world in which what he has said to defend himself, which is that he had confusion over his heritage, and that which other people have come forward and said I have had to, and that his business partner was the one who made sure that the company was identified as Indigenous, so that he did not have any knowledge? Is there a world in which Mr. Boissonnault did not do any of this maliciously?
Well, look, all you have to do is look at what Randy Boissonnault has been caught out in falsehoods already. He said there was another Randy working at the company. Turns out there wasn't. He was the only Randy. He said that he wasn't communicating with the company while he was in cabinet. Now we know there were text messages back and forth between the other people at the company and himself. Now we find out that the company was falsely stating that he had Indigenous heritage, that he himself has self-identified and declared that he had this heritage, when in fact he doesn't. And I don't think we should characterize this as a distraction. This is a cabinet minister. These are the actions of a government minister, someone who sits around the cabinet table as we talk about important issues like reconciliation and procurement rules that are meant to help legitimate Indigenous-owned companies access the procurement system. And so these are very serious allegations. And I would also point out that Justin Trudeau has not held Randy Boissonnault to account for any of this. All they've said today is that he's going to step away. So this is like a timeout. Jody Wilson-Raybould was fired for telling the truth. A strong Indigenous woman was fired for telling the truth under Justin Trudeau, yet he protects a weak, fake Indigenous man for telling falsehoods. And that's what Canadians should understand about this.
I'm going to put the same.
That's a good point, because we've been using the term fired. Essentially, he's been kicked out of cabinet, but Boissonnault is still sitting as an MP as far as we know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is. I use the term fired because yesterday he was getting paid $300,000 a year. Today he is not. He's getting paid $200,000 a year.
Poor baby.
So he is down $100,000 a year, and I'm sure any Canadian would like to have that.
I mean, maybe the best term to use here is demoted, because again, he's still an MP. He hasn't lost his seat, not yet anyways. I wonder if they will either make him an independent or if they will keep him on until, let's say, February, because if he leaves then, it's too soon, too close to the next general election for them to hold a by-election. So therefore, there'll be one less seat in the House, but the Conservatives or the Bloc won't be able to fill it instead.
Well, and this is the funny thing. Can they afford to make him an independent? Like, Liberals are dropping seats like flies.
They are, because there's another one coming up in a couple of weeks, I think in BC, is it?
Yes, and they're going to lose that one.
Yeah, to the Conservatives.
So that's another one. You've already...
they lost Rodriguez because he's trying to run for provincial parliament in Quebec.
And they lost St. Paul. They lost the Quebec riding.
Yeah.
La Salle-Mar.
They're just bleeding seats. So I guess, yeah, maybe fired isn't the best word. Maybe demoted.
How about thrown out? Because he was thrown out of cabinet.
Or he was relegated to the back bench is what happened.
He's been put on a one-way cruise to Mendocino Island.
That I would agree with, yes.
Same question though to you again, once again, just because I think, look, the ethics commissioner looked into a lot of the allegations that you made initially around the Randys. I agree, like eyebrow raising. At the same time, concluded that there was no breach of conflict of interest rules in the case of Minister Boissonnault.
Okay, Bashi, you were doing well up until then. So I don't know if she's just using this question to kind of just play devil's advocate, which is possible, but you can't do that in this case because sure, the ethics commissioner concluded there was no wrongdoing, but then they found more communication afterwards, which Randy did not provide to the ethics commissioner after being required to turn over all communication to the ethics commissioner. So he knowingly did not do that. Right. So yeah, of course, the ethics commissioner is going to find no wrongdoing
at the time and when they don't have all the proper details.
Right. So what do you expect to happen here? So I don't think that's a very fair hypothesis. Not a hypothesis, but a
line of questioning,
a premise to actually put forward when you're trying to kind of play devil's advocate here. But you know, it is what it is.
At that point, when the commissioner had investigated that stuff. Since that's the conclusion the ethics commissioner arrived at in that instance, is it also not possible that what Mr. Boissonnault was saying to defend himself is also true?
Well, I would say if you look at the past untruths that he's been caught in, it's probably a good indicator of what's to come in the future. I will also point out there's new information coming to light. The RCMP now saying that they're investigating the Edmonton Police. Thank you. The fact that his company is facing 9 fraud-related charges. So there's a lot more to this. And rather than deal with this right away by coming clean on all of this, Mr. Boissonnault continually tried to evade scrutiny, was caught out in falsehoods. And again, Justin Trudeau is still not acknowledging that he's done anything wrong. All they've said is that he's taking a timeout, taking a step away. Who knows? Does that mean he's going to be brought back into cabinet after Christmas? They didn't even say why he's doing it, other than just an oblique reference to clearing his name. So there's still a lot more that we need to get answers
Mr. Julian, though, what if, in fact, the Prime Minister is saying that because there is a possibility that Mr. Boissonnault does clear his name?
Okay, so before we get to Julian, Scheer makes some really good points. And I think the best point that he's made, and he's made it a couple times, is I'm sorry, I'm not willing to accept that, oh, this was all just a big misunderstanding, because there have been several instances where Randy Boissonnault has been proven to be lying, to be deliberately deceiving on some of this stuff. So this is the problem. The minute you start telling a lie, you are now not credible. So everything you say after that is now in question. So no, we don't believe that he's been confused about his heritage. And Bashi said, well, you know, other people are confused about their heritage. Yeah, you know, people that are confused about their heritage don't go around saying, hey, I'm confused, but my grandmother is a full-blooded Cree, and here's some Cree words that I'm saying, and I'm going to join the Indigenous caucus because of that. So, but I'm confused. No, that's not what confused people do. It's not. So I don't buy that, and I don't think anybody else buys that either. I don't even think Garrettson buys that. He's just parroting the Liberal talking points.
Are you open to that possibility? Like I said to Mr. Scheer, that, you know, the defense he has provided is one that is factual, is true, that possibly he didn't do anything wrong.
Well, there's a whole bunch of contradictions in his stories. I think Blake Desjardins yesterday on your show was very eloquent in calling for his resignation. There is no doubt that needed to happen. And it does undermine, destroy reconciliation in the same way that the fact that there are dozens of Indigenous communities that don't have safe drinking water, like Laurie Idlut raised today in the House of Commons, has destroyed reconciliation. The fact that it's been more than 2 years since a single call to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been implemented by this government, that destroys reconciliation. This is a contradiction that I think Mr. Trudeau wears, that as this controversy developed, he did not take action, and Mr. Boissonnault should have resigned days ago.
With great respect, do you have any proof that Minister Boissonnault set out to maliciously represent himself in order to do what? Is it your view to curry favor with the company he co-owned, because he denies even knowing that they were being identified as Indigenous owned?
Well, the truth will come out. But my point is this, that reconciliation is being destroyed by both the inaction of the current government, but also the fact that in a case like this, Mr. Trudeau waited days before there was any action at all.
So I get that Vashi's trying to play devil's advocate, but here's the thing. When it comes to these bids that his company GHI had submitted for government contracts while identifying as an Indigenous, and these contracts that they were trying to bid on were for the Indigenous set-aside, meaning only Indigenous companies or classified Indigenous companies were eligible to bid on them. There was two people in this company, Randy Boissonnault, or Bozzio if you talk to Gerritsen, and Stephen Anderson. So you're telling me that Stephen Anderson put together the whole bid, all the justification, all by himself, and submitted it without Randy Boissonnault knowing?
But I
don't think so.
Okay, so Stephen Anderson definitely isn't Indigenous, right?
Right.
He never goes around claiming that he's Indigenous.
Correct.
So, he would have to be referring to Randy.
Correct.
If it's not himself. So either he did that independently, or he did that together with Boissonnault.
But this is what Boissonnault is trying to say. I wasn't aware of that. So he's essentially trying to say that Stephen Anderson put together that whole bid, all the RFP, all the financials, everything, and didn't talk to Randy at all.
Well, let's find it and see whose name is on it.
Well, it would be both of them. It would be the company name. That's the thing, right? It would be GHI. So,
well, I know in our company, nothing happens without both of us knowing about it.
Right. So it would be impossible.
Unlikely. Let's say extremely unlikely. Not impossible, but extremely unlikely.
Well, put it this way. It doesn't even matter if he knew or not. He's accountable because he's one of the owners. You are accountable for everything going out there. Just as every MP is accountable for every public statement that goes out there,
out of their office, done by their staffers,
whether they know about it or not.
Yep.
Just like Greg Fergus is held accountable, and he was we tried to hold him accountable last Christmas when statements went out from his office with his name on it. He is supposed to know everything that goes out.
Well, and this is why you have to trust explicitly, the person that you're in business with, because say Anderson did take it upon himself to put these out, Boissonnault's still accountable for it.
Right. But here's the other thing, right? Here's the other thing. Randy could have just been saying to Anderson, oh yeah, I'm Indigenous. So even if he didn't know that Anderson did that, Anderson could have said, oh, okay, you're Indigenous. Great, Randy's Indigenous. We're Indigenous owned. We qualify for this. I'm submitting that. So in a way, that doesn't even wash either, because he's given everybody the impression that he's Indigenous. So now he's saying, oh, no, wait, I was lying and I didn't know about that. So, so that's not my fault. Either way, this is not going to go away for Randy Boissonnault. And the interesting thing is, on this panel, when they were talking about this, notice that the Conservatives and the NDP weren't crossing swords at all, because they know it's in both of their political interests not to do that at this point. You kick the horse while they're down. And that was Gerritsen in this case. And
it sure was.
With 2 feet in his mouth up to the thigh, he was busy enough trying not to, say anything else stupid that was going to embarrass him and the Liberals. So why would they go at each other when they could just kick him in the sides and humiliate him even more than they already have? But this is the Randy Boissonnault saga up to this point, and it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds, because it's not going to end. There's a police investigation going on now.